Welcome back to the channel. This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and it is Saturday around 3:30, 4 o'clock, and you might be watching some Jameis Winston interceptions. A good game, though, nonetheless, between the Texans playing for a playoff spot, clinching their division, and, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that are always on the verge of throwing the next pick six. But, hey, we're here today to talk about DFS, tomorrow's main slate, on DraftKings, on FanDuel. It is Week 16. We have a good 11-game slate playing out tomorrow. And in this video, we're going to talk about just that. Our core plays, our top plays for tomorrow, guys that you can look to build your lineups around, guys that are in good spots, all that and more coming at you here live, No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Stay tuned. Happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas. This is the last video before we hit Christmas next week. And welcome back to the show and the channel, the video here on YouTube. Of course, this is No Huddle Fantasy Sports. We're talking Week 16 DFS specifically, DraftKings, FanDuel, our core plays, our best plays, guys that I will be personally building my lineups around. And I'd also recommend you guys take a look at for reasons I'm going to give in this video that you can build lineups around to make sure you succeed or put in the best spot for DFS tomorrow. Of course, we do have a big, nice slate tomorrow. It is an 11-game slate, both sites tomorrow on Sunday, and we have a lot of different things playing out. We have certain teams playing for absolutely nothing. Certain players may be playing for contracts on bad teams, but we also have the other side of the ball. We have players and teams trying to clinch divisions, trying to clinch playoff berths, trying to clinch home field advantage in the playoff. So all of that has to be navigated, some of it more important than others. We're going to focus on all of that, talk about all of that throughout this video, and that's going to help us set the best lineups for DFS. Now, I will say this is a busy week. I already published a couple of videos. Today we have our small 3-game slate, our fun slate as I called it in the video. If you haven't already, if you're new here, please check out those videos. I posted 2 videos already this week. Both of them came out yesterday. The first one's important if you play season long or DFS. It's a matchup video. I talk about defense versus position information. I will link that video up above. It applies to everything. If you're in a championship looking to start somebody in the flex, that might help you there. If you're playing DFS trying to figure out which spots are best to attack with offenses, with offensive players, that'll help you there. But I also posted a video today, of course, covering this slate. If you're playing any of the showdowns, it's still relevant. There's 3 games today. All players are discussed. I talk about spots I like, spots I don't like, and where I'm heading with certain games playing out today. So again, please check out those videos. If you like these videos, make sure you give them a thumbs up. Give this video a thumbs up. And of course, if you're new here or simply have been following me, enjoy these videos, make sure you are subscribed. Hit that subscribe button. Easiest way to support the channel, support No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and stay up to date. There's a couple more weeks left of the season, really only one other week. We have some playoff games. I'll be doing DFS related to that. And then beyond that, I'm a big MLB player. I love MLB DFS specifically, so stay tuned for that in the spring. The easiest way to stay up to date, get some of the videos I'll be posting related to that, is to make sure you are subscribed to the channel. With all of that being said, let's get the gears rolling here. I do apologize, this video is coming out pretty late on a Saturday. We only have a couple hours until kickoff tomorrow to get ready, but it's done on purpose. We are so late in the season. There's a lot of different things, a lot of implications, like I mentioned, related to playoff games, certain players, and of course injuries. I want to make sure we are as close to lock as we possibly can as I relay this information, because certain value opens up and certain players become, I guess, ineligible or off my list based upon injury. All that is important. We're going to talk about that here in a minute, but as always, we're going to quickly look at last week, week 15, real quick recap. I didn't really enjoy last week. It wasn't the best week for me, to be perfectly honest with you guys. I had another weird week where I didn't get into the tournaments I wanted to get into, so I scrambled around, entered a bunch of lineups across a multitude of different tournaments. Just an absolute mess. But you can see here, anybody highlighted as a guy I recommended in the video. Unfortunately, the best guys that went off for me, guys that I was really high on, were guys I didn't get the most exposure to. Ian Thomas off the bat sucked at tight end. He was cheap, so it didn't kill us. Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson were my 2 biggest quarterbacks owned. I recommended both of them. They did okay. Didn't go 4 or 5x, which is what we want, but they were okay considering what they put up. Kenny Golladay wasn't very good. Chris Carson went absolutely off, but he was highly owned, predictable by pretty much the industry as a whole. D.D. Westbrook, started him, thought without Chark he would be much better. Clearly wasn't. Chris Godwin and Devontae Parker, both of those guys I loved. They went off. Fortunately, I didn't get more exposure to them due to their pricing. Patrick Laird, I'm done probably playing him. It's whatever with him, but he was okay. He was like $4,500 on DraftKings, got us 7-8 points. It's whatever. David Montgomery was a guy I mentioned, big risk here, a big risk on my part, but I wanted to take a shot with him. Got a little bit of ownership with him, and he absolutely sucks. So hopefully you didn't play him and listen to my high risk, high reward type of explanation on him. Next up, I have Tyler Higbee. Wish I would have flipped him and Ian Thomas. Obviously, he had a great game, absolutely killed it. Everett's back today, though, so we're going to see if he continues to play. Great tight end for them, though. Jarvis Landry, just kind of done with that offense right now. There's just too much going on. There's a lot of narrative regarding them wanting to play for other teams. Just stay away from the Cleveland Browns, in my opinion, to finish out the season. And then finally here, my most favorite expensive running back, Ezekiel Elliott. I only got 6% exposure to. He was in 9 of my lineups. Didn't do much he went off, but I did not get much exposure to him, which I wish I would have. But overall, it was an okay, like I mentioned. I lost money last week, which does always suck, but we didn't go absolutely zero. I will show you a couple lineups here that I actually did okay in. You can see 178 points was the most amount of points I put up. Wasn't the biggest week by any means, but certainly did cash a couple lineups, and these were these were my best lineups. Anywhere from 164 up to 178 is kind of where I rested with a few lineups, but again, this isn't a representative sample of my entire day. Was weird in terms of getting into tournaments, and it certainly didn't finish the best. And so what are we looking at for week 16? Well, this is really kind of the final week that you can go, in my opinion, with DFS, considering you still have most teams playing. Next week is when you're going to see players like especially Lamar Jackson sit. Other guys that are clinching playoffs, clinching 1 seeds, they're not going to play, or they're only going to play a half. It's going to be really weird in week 17. So take advantage of this week. Start the guys that you want to start. For quarterback, I got 2 guys I'm looking at. It's Lamar Jackson for Baltimore and Dak Prescott for Dallas. Lamar Jackson obviously doesn't need much of an introduction or explanation. I just truly believe this is the last week you're going to really get to play him in a solid smash spot. He's 8,000 on DraftKings, 9,300 on FanDuel, worth every penny, most expensive quarterback, playing as an away favorite in Cleveland, 49.5 over-under, so a solid over-under total. He's a minus 9.5 favorite, though, which isn't ideal for quarterbacks, but he is on the road, and we know when they score points, it's always through him. Whether it's him throwing 5 touchdowns, rushing for 2, whatever it is, he usually pays off. They do have the second highest team total at 29, nearly 30 points. So of that 49.5, they're expected to score nearly 30 of those points. Always good. If points are going to be scored by Baltimore, you know Lamar Jackson is obviously involved. He has that high floor, around 15, plus he couples that with a super high ceiling. We've seen him put up nearly 38, especially on places like DraftKings, where you get certain bonuses for rushing and passing. He's had 10 touchdowns total in his last 3 games. That includes rushing and passing, and he's had 35 rush attempts. Will he gear it back this week? We'll have to see. Certainly expect him to in week 17 if he plays, but again, that's the big thing with him. He rushes the ball 10, 12, 13, 14. We've seen him rush the ball a ridiculous amount of times in games, but that gives him that floor and that upside. He's a safe play all around, whether you're playing cash or if you're playing tournaments. Certainly you got to try to afford him and fit other players in, but for me, he's my number 1 quarterback. I'm going to make an effort to get him in this week, and it's kind of like the last chance to play him. Like I said, likely limited in week 17, but for this last chance for week 16, I will be forcing Lamar Jackson into as many lineups as I can. Next up here, I have Dak Prescott for Dallas. I think he is underpriced on both sites, 6,400 on DraftKings, 8,000 on FanDuel. I'll just skip to this last key point here. Keep an eye on him and his injury. He did hurt his shoulder. He was limited in practice. It was questionable. Certain doctors said he wouldn't play. He said he will play. Just yesterday or a few hours ago, they made sure that he was listed. He was no longer listed on the injury report and will be active tomorrow. Little bit of risk here, but I do love Dak Prescott for Dallas. He's an away favorite, similar to Jackson, at Philadelphia. 46.5 over-under, a close spread at 1.5. The big thing here is I love towards the end of the season playing these divisional big games, have playoff implications. We're talking about a division winning game here. It's Philadelphia versus Dallas. Pretty shitty division right now, but the winner of this game goes into the playoffs. So we kind of have to expect the best of the best here. Everyone's going to be on their A game. Week 7, they did already play. He has a little bit, obviously a history against Philadelphia, but so far this season, he played them in week 7. This was at home. He threw for 239 passing yards and 2 total touchdowns. Doesn't sound like much, but he was an extremely efficient game. I think they murdered Philadelphia that game. and he still put up 2 touchdowns. So for me personally, in following what Vegas is suggesting here, it shouldn't be a blowout. It should be a tight, close game, high-scoring, divisional game. I like Dak Prescott for that reason, and he's had a great season so far, especially games when they get behind, when they have to throw the ball. He's been excellent. 3 out of the last 5 games, he's had 330 or more passing yards and multiple touchdowns. All good things. Philadelphia secondary too. They can certainly defend the run. I don't really like Elliott this week. You can like Elliott any week. You're starting him in season long, all that stuff. I get it. He's an elite back. But in terms of DFS pricing, Philadelphia is good. They're a top tier team, a top 5 team in terms of defending the run, but they are an awful team in their secondary versus the pass. The opportunity against them is through the air. I certainly love that for Dak Prescott. His receivers, he should be healthy tomorrow. I'm counting on that, but his price at $6,400 on DraftKings is way too low for a guy that can throw 300 plus, multiple touchdowns, runs the ball a little bit. I love Dak Prescott, but for those of you that don't like to take risk, I think he'll be low owned because of this. Watch the injury. If you're scared of the injury, don't play him, go elsewhere. Picking up the pace here, we spent enough time on quarterback. Let's jump to running backs. Marlon Mack for Indianapolis, my number 1 guy this week. $6,200 on DraftKings, $7,300 on FanDuel. I think a fair price. I know some people are scared away from him. He hasn't had the greatest season, but he is playing at home. He's a solid home favorite versus Carolina. Always love to play home favorite running backs. He is their guy. They don't really play anyone else. But the big thing here is he's playing Carolina. Carolina is simply the best running back matchup by far. If you've watched games or look at it on paper, it doesn't matter. They cannot stop the run. They've given up a ridiculous amount of touchdowns in the red zone, a ridiculous amount of touchdowns to running backs, particularly on the ground. And if you compare that to second place, it's not even close. They simply allow running backs to score and score and score, and they give up a ridiculous amount of yards. Last week, we saw Chris Carson in a smash spot against them, rush for 130 plus yards and 2 touchdowns, 5.0 yard per carry average. I expect basically the same thing from Marlon Mack this week. Indianapolis still trying to possibly get a playoff spot. They got to win. They're playing at home. They're going to run the ball 15, 20 attempts out of Marlon Mack at these prices against such a weak Carolina defense. Sign me up all day. Next up, I listed Joe Mixon for Cincinnati. $6,700 on DraftKings, $7,000 on FanDuel. A little bit more than I really want to pay for a running back on such a bad team, but he's basically had an opportunity, a steady opportunity over and over again, week in and week out, regardless of scores of games, regardless of game flow. They're still feeding Joe Mixon the ball. He had 23 touches or more over his last 3 games. Every single game, 23 plus or more touches. Miami, of course, they're playing awful team in terms of defense. They can't stop anyone, giving up 126 plus per game on average rushing yards, anywhere from 25 to 28 fantasy points per game given up to running backs, depending on if it's half point PPR or full point PPR. Love Joe Mixon. Smash spot for him this week. Got to play him. Next up here, I have Devontae Freeman for Atlanta. Keep in mind, a lot of people I think are going to be on him. He's pretty cheap in terms of running backs this week in a smash spot, playing at home against Jacksonville. You're looking at a $6,000 price tag on DraftKings, $6,200 on FanDuel. I love the price on FanDuel. I'm going to be playing mostly FanDuel this week, and this is a guy I will be building around. Obviously, why I'm recommending here. But the big thing with him, he hasn't had a great season, especially last week. There really wasn't much. But I think this week against Jacksonville at home is a smash spot for him. Jacksonville is just awful right now. They're kind of giving up in games, not playing second half on defense. I think they are literally on paper the worst tackling team in the NFL, but it's an excellent home matchup. They're favored, so he is a favored home running back versus a very weak run defense in Jacksonville Jaguars. Over the last 4 games, the Jacksonville Jaguars have given up 133 rushing yards per game, anywhere from 33 to 37 fantasy points per game to running backs based upon half point or full point PPR. And realistically, I know he didn't have many rushes or many attempts last week. I think you can expect anywhere from 17 to 20 rushing attempts from Devontae Freeman this week versus Jacksonville, and then beyond that, anywhere from 4 to 5 targets through the air. So all good things. I love that for Devontae Freeman. I think he's in a smash spot and certainly can take advantage of him this week. And finally here, the fourth guy I will recommend is DeAndre Washington for Oakland. This isn't a surprise if you follow DFS throughout the year or basically throughout the week. You know Josh Jacobs is down, so this gives this guy an opportunity. I can't believe they actually ran Jacobs last week with such a bad shoulder injury and being a rookie, and they're going to build around him. But regardless, this is DeAndre Washington's week for Oakland. Good price, both sites. Well, On DraftKings, he's $4,000. That becomes $5,600 on FanDuel. It offers a solid value with a ton of opportunity. And beyond that, it's a solid matchup. Los Angeles Chargers are a bottom 10 defense in terms of defending the run. But really, this is a value play based upon opportunity. He'll get the start. He'll get the majority of the workload. They seem to be committed to the run. So all good things for a cheap DeAndre Washington this week. Just keep in mind he will be highly owned. Next up, we'll get to the wide receiver position here. 4 guys I'm going to be recommending. The number 1 guy, though, this week, a guy I love, is Julio Jones for Atlanta. I know I talked about Devontae Freeman. You might not want to play them together, but I do love Julio Jones as the as an expensive recommended wide receiver this week for Atlanta. Price is $8,000 across both sites. So on FanDuel is where I really love that price. They're typically, because of their salaries, they should be higher. The amount of money you get on FanDuel is more, but these prices are the same. So FanDuel, a great price for Julio Jones. He had an insane 20 targets last week, turned that into 13 receptions. All good things. Calvin Ridley went down. I think that offers and opens up more opportunity. Not that he doesn't have an opportunity, but more opportunity for an elite receiver in Julio Jones. I think Calvin Ridley's currently or was averaging around 8 targets a game. So add that, basically, even if you split that in half, that's another 4 targets going Julio Jones' way. And I think Atlanta, being they're not playing for much, they have a home game. I think this is their last home game of the season. So they'll be feeding their studs, making sure their players are happy, trying to build up some stats here. I do love them. I do love Julio Jones playing against Jacksonville. Again, a team that simply sucks on defense right now. Can't really defend anyone, is not really trying to anyway. And just behind Julio Jones, another elite receiver I've loved over the last couple of years, but I really love, I think is in a smash spot, is Amari Cooper for Dallas. Obviously pairs perfectly with that Dak Prescott quarterback play, but again, this depends upon Dak Prescott. If he's not going to play for some reason, looks injured or something comes out, get off that play with Dak, get off the Amari Cooper play. But for now, I love him playing on the road in Philadelphia. We talked about Philadelphia in other videos and matchup videos. They just are awful against number 1 receivers. In week 7, if you look back to that, a game in which Dallas, I mentioned, absolutely killed Philadelphia. He still had 5 targets, 5 receptions, and 106 receiving yards. All good things. That number should go up in a more competitive divisional game this week. Philadelphia can defend the run. They simply cannot defend the pass, and they cannot defend number 1 receivers. Amari Cooper for Dallas, an elite receiver by every metric, certainly in a smash spot this week. So good things apparently do come out of Miami this season, and that is Devontae Parker for Miami. He just got a big contract, having an excellent season, really turned it around, especially when my dude Ryan Fitzpatrick came under center. Guy that's just going to sling the ball downfield, plays perfectly into Devontae Parker's talents. A guy that was drafted high, had a couple bad seasons, but finally is turning into form. Really got to like Devontae Parker, having, like I mentioned, an excellent season, but his price kind of stays the same. He's coming off a big 2-touchdown game last week, but his price isn't moving. He's $6,800 on DraftKings, $6,900 on FanDuel. Love that FanDuel price, just the same as I liked Julio Jones. If the price is that close, you got to favor FanDuel. He's had 48 targets over his last 5 games, and that's excluding that one. He got banged up or got a concussion, I think 2 weeks ago. But if you remove that game, you're talking about 48 targets over the last 5 healthy games. All good things. You're getting 10 targets a game from Ryan Fitzpatrick. Not scared to force the ball in there, throw the ball downfield, and he's a value, in my opinion, at his salary. He's a number 1 receiver in a offense that's going to pass the ball, it's going to feed him the ball, and if he has touchdown upside like he did last week, man, he could blow through that value salary. Finally here, I always like to give you guys or leave you with one little bit of a value play, and if I'm going to pick anybody, if I'm going to spend down at receiver, it's going to be Greg Ward for Philadelphia. He's only $4,200 on DraftKings, $5,700 on FanDuel, so affordable prices both sites, value play in my opinion. He's had an increased opportunity and an increase in volume and targets, mostly because Philadelphia is simply decimated with injuries, whether it's Alshon Jeffrey or anyone else in there. I'm not even sure who else they're playing at wide receiver right now, but Greg Ward has had 18 targets over the last 2 games. You gotta love that. You want to play into that, especially at his salary. We talked about Dak Prescott. We talked about Amari Cooper. This is a great way to come back against those guys if you're into that in GPPs. He certainly is getting the targets. There's really no one else besides Ertz to throw to. A divisional game should be high-paced, high-tempo, a lot of good things playing into that game. They're going to keep it competitive and keep it high scoring. Greg Ward is the clear value play in my opinion at the wide receiver position. And I'm going to go a little unusual here. I typically, if you followed other videos, I love to spend down at tight end. I hate the position. I hate trying to figure out who's going to get the ball. But this week, I'm probably going to play Zach Ertz mostly for Philadelphia. I talked about Greg Ward and how he's the only real receiver worth playing. Well, the ball's getting fed basically. Besides him, it's getting fed to Zach Ertz. Carson Wentz has nowhere else to go with the ball, and he's making it count with Ertz. Price is okay. If you consider him a wide receiver, which effectively he is based upon volume and targets, he's an excellent price. So just look at it that way. Easily the number one target and favorite weapon for Carson Wentz. Last week, he had a 10-target, 5-reception game, turned it into 61 yards and a touchdown. We saw him just terrorize the New York Giants a couple weeks ago, so he's getting used more and more. You're talking about 29 total targets over the last 3 games, nearly 10 targets a game. They're in a must-win situation. Talked about this several times already. A divisional playoff determining game against the Dallas Cowboys at home. In Dallas, if you want to talk about matchup, not the best matchup in the world, but obviously not the hardest team in the world to attack with tight ends. They are a top 10 fantasy point per game matchup for the tight end position. I don't think you really need to consider that, considering Zach Ertz is who he is. He's an elite top tier tight end, but I love him as my number one tight end this week for Philadelphia. And it, of course, wouldn't be a typical weekly No Huddle Fantasy Sports show without recommending a tight end versus the Arizona Cardinals, and that's what we're going to do here on the cheap. Jacob Hollister for Seattle. Seattle is playing a home game against the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals, obviously, we've talked about it week after week after week, suck against tight ends, cannot defend the position. People try to argue against it and who they've played. I don't care. Just stream tight ends. If it's a healthy tight end, if it's going to be a guy that's going to be on the field, stream them at cheap prices at any price really, against the Arizona Cardinals. He's $4,200 on DraftKings, $5,700 on FanDuel, so definitely an attractive price on both sites. He's had 17 targets over the last 3 games, so he's certainly getting 5-6 targets a game. Certainly good things to see here, especially if he's going to get those targets around the red zone. You can expect, I believe, 5 targets, anywhere from 30 to 50 yards, but he has touchdown upside. I talked about the Cardinals. They've given up literally a touchdown or more in every single game to the tight end position. Last week, I didn't play Njoku because I just don't like him and I don't like the Cleveland Browns, but he didn't score, of course, which is great for me. Safari Jenkins, whatever the other backup tight end, of course he scored. He got into the game. He scored against the Arizona Cardinals. So if he can score, I believe Jacob Hollister certainly can as the number one tight end for the Seattle Seahawks. He's a value price, especially on DraftKings. Just go ahead. If you're going to try to save money at tight end, he's my top pick for the matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. And so that wraps up the weekly Week 16 core plays, top plays for me. Guys, I'll build around both DraftKings and FanDuel DFS purposes, but we play other players. I can't give you lineups. I play a lot of different lineups. I mix things in and out. I haven't really started building anything yet, but these are other guys I'm considering. And right off the bat here, I'm going to recommend Ryan Fitzpatrick for Miami. Dude just keeps slinging it. They're playing a home game, last home game of the season. Love Devontae Parker. If he has him, Ryan Fitzpatrick in a great spot. He's actually ran the ball a few times in the last few games. He's got a good floor for a cheap quarterback. And if Dak Prescott's not going to play, I'm going to bump him up more, bump Ryan Tannehill up a little bit more. So keep in mind, watch that injury with Dak Prescott. I can't stress that enough. Next up, I want to list Melvin Gordon here for the Chargers. He's playing in likely it's their last home game as a team. I believe they're going to have their new stadium next year, but it could be his last home game as a Charger. So if he's going to have any motivation based upon that, it's a good matchup for him. I don't really like the situation with Eckler, but I do like Melvin Gordon this week for the Chargers. Just a couple other things I want to throw around here. Michael Thomas for New Orleans, safest play for cash games. We have A.J. Brown for Tennessee, having an excellent season, especially of late, pairs perfectly with Ryan Tannehill. And last but not least here, highlighted in red, this is a FanDuel only play. Kerryon Johnson will be back for Detroit, expects to play, which blows my mind considering they're not really playing for anything. He is obviously their stud, their star running back, has missed most of the season with injury. Will he be eased back in? Very possible. He might not get a full workload. I actually probably likely won't get a full workload, but in the case he does, he is bare minimum priced on FanDuel, has not been priced up at all. A decent matchup, and if you want any positivity, he's practiced for the last couple of weeks, so if he's in shape, if he does get a full workload, he at minimum price could just absolutely crush and murder that spot. But again, FanDuel only play, be careful. I'm not really recommending it per se as a core play, but something I just wanted to point out. And so that's it. That wraps up our weekly video, our core play, top play video here on No Huddle Fantasy Sports for Week 16 NFL DFS, DraftKings, and FanDuel. I really hope you guys enjoy this video. If you did, give it a like and a thumbs up. Of course, leave me some comments down below if I've missed anything, if I'm out of line on any of these plays, or if you recommend or see anything I might have missed. Please let me know down in the comments below. And finally, as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're new here, haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And last but not least, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. I wish you the best of luck tomorrow, main slate DFS.